Hello and welcome to another video on the best games of a letter, Arcade Edition. And this video is for the letter O. This is where I imagine, what if I could only choose 5 games per letter per system and discard all others? What would I choose? So this means I'm not coming from the point of view of what games are most important to video game history, or even which games are most beloved, but instead, for me personally, what games do I enjoy to play above all else? Now my choices here may surprise you, but this video series is just a bit of fun and really a way to rekindle some old memories and help people give suggestions on what games to try and play the next time they're looking through their fully loaded retro gaming lists to decide what to play. Okay, as I mentioned, this is for the arcades and the letter O. And whilst this letter lacks the sheer volume of some of the other letters, it more than makes up for it with great quality games. So without further ado, let us begin. Now for my 5th choice, I had a really tough time as there's a few that nearly took this slot, quite frankly. But in the end, after much playing, I eventually decided on this game, Outrun, released in 1990 by the shooter veterans Outland. For the uninitiated, this is an overhead run and gun game, very similar mould to games like Commando, Ikari Warriors and Mercs. And it has you run round in a blisteringly fast way, shooting everything on screen in really punishing levels as you save the Earth from an alien invasion. Now the game feels a lot like Tatsujin or Truxton meets Commando, and I think that's a great way to describe it, because the game, certainly like Truxton, is admittedly eye-wateringly difficult, but it's never cheap with its deaths, so you can always get further with practice and has plenty of great enemies, bullet patterns and bosses for you to encounter. It's also set to really cool catchy music by veteran Tatsuya Umera, who's of course worked on Air Galley, Tiger Heli and Zero Wing, to name but a few. Now most of the team who worked on this, including the legendary designer Naoki Ogiwara, had previously worked on Zero Wing, but they of course went on to Cave and worked on games like Donpachi and Dudonpachi, as well as Fever SOS, which, as I mentioned previously, are some of my favourite shooters of all time. Now in fact though, for fans of the shooting genre, you will see little nods appear in this game to many of their previous games, such as you'll see Truxton, Flying Shark, Zero Wing and their enemy ships all appearing in the games dotted around at certain points. And it's great to see. I love these little nods that they give to people that love their shooters that will notice such things. Sadly though, for this game the only way to play it is either if you're lucky enough to stumble across it in the arcades or emulate it on something like MAME, as there's never ever been a home port of this title. Thankfully there are rumours of M2 working on emulating it, along with all the Outland shooters for the Switch. So I'm really hopeful and fingers crossed we'll see them soon. Okay, so overall this is a classic, if admittedly a platinum hard blaster, but definitely one well worthy of your time. Now for my 4th game, I've gone for a real classic. It is of course Operation Wolf by Taito and released in 1987. Now it's difficult to appreciate how big this game was on its release, with its Uzi shaped gun joystick that let you target and shoot all the enemies. Yeah, it's really difficult to get that feeling of the impact that this game had to people that weren't around at the time, because this title had kids around the world falling in love with its all-out action. Now, sure, there have been virtual shooting ranges before, but there was never anything like this, with so many scrolling locations and telling a story of Special Forces Green Beret operative Roy Adams, who must rescue hostages deep in enemy territory. I mean, this was 80s action movie at its finest. Now, just like those Rambo films that it's kind of loosely based, this game has you overrun with constant enemies, so you must use the ever-depleting ammo and rocket grenades to take out the range of terrorists, tanks and helicopters, all the while avoiding the nurses and hostages that are stupid enough to run in your line of fire. Now thankfully, along with gun magazines left strewn around, there's also a range of animals who kindly, if you shoot them, drop bullets out of their ass. God bless the 80s and video game logic, eh? Now this game is as much fun to play as it was on its initial release, and whilst of course it's always better on original arcade machine hardware with the wonderful vibrations of the gun as you shoot, and thankfully this is another one that's in Arcade Club in Bury in all its glory, it's also good on a whole vast range of great home ports, being on pretty much every home system of the day, from the humble Spectrum up to the Amiga, and all with the beautiful box art of Bob Wakelin. Years later, thankfully the game did get an arcade perfect port on the brilliant Taito Legends pack in the PS2 and original Xbox era, and it works perfectly on emulators like MAME, as you can see here. So it's definitely one well worthy of taking your time to pick this up again and play through. Right, okay, let's go on to my third choice, and I've decided to go for Operation Wolf's sequel called Operation Thunderbolt, also by Taito of course, and released the following year in 1988. Now, not only does this add another Special Forces Green Beret operative called Hardy Jones, yes, because you have now two people fighting side by side, which is wonderful to see, and this time you are rescuing hostages on a hijacked airliner. Now the game is loosely and unofficially based on a 1977 film of the same name, Operation Thunderbolt, which in turn was based on a true story called Operation Entebbe, which was a plane hijacking in 1976. Now gameplay wise though, it's really similar to Operation Wolf before, but with a greater variety of levels, with you often this time finding you can scroll into the action as well as horizontal, and it has you ride jeeps and boats as you make your way through, following such as
Operation initiated. Rescue all hostages.
and
Made contact with intelligent agent and obtained information.
sorry about that, my voice went all funny there. Overall, this is a real blast to play and better than its prequel, improving on it in almost every way in my opinion. Now this is another game that's far better of course on real arcade cabinet with the vibrating guns and having the two of you crammed in front of the screen. But for those not lucky enough to go to Arcade Club in Bury or venues like that, because yes, they've got it here as well, then thankfully there's some really good home ports of this game, with it appearing on most home computers back in the day. Now the best ports of it of course was on the Amiga and ST, where it really does feel pretty arcade perfect and the mouse really does simulate the light gun pretty well, being a lot of fun to play through. Now years later it did appear on the Taito Legends pack as well in the PS2 and original Xbox era, so at that point we finally got an arcade perfect port in the home, which of course I love. Nowadays though, the only way to play it is on MAME or, as I mentioned, in an arcade venue where they still are lucky enough to house it. Yes, all in all though, for me, this was the peak of the Operation Wolf series. They did do two more. Operation Wolf 3 was terrible and Operation Tiger was still pretty bad as well. I think the biggest problem was they moved away from the gorgeous hand-drawn pixel artwork to the uglier digitized scans of Operation Wolf 3 and the ugly 3D models of Operation Tiger, and so they lost much of the game's original charm. Yes, let's go back to Operation Thunderbolt and give it a go, you won't be disappointed. Okay, now we come on to my second choice, and I think this may really surprise you, but I've gone for the original Outrun, released by Sega in 1986 by Yu Suzuki. Well, actually, I've not quite gone for the original version, because on reflection, I've gone for the enhanced version called Outrun Enhanced. Now, this is a ROM and PCB hack that's been done by retro lover Chris White in the UK, and he single-handedly completely reverse engineered the original Outrun code and then recoded it into C++, and he's subsequently put wonderful subtle tweaks to make this game even better. But for the uninitiated, what is Outrun? Well, it has you and your girlfriend hop in your Ferrari Testarossa, put on some awesome tunes and race out under Sega blue skies across Europe, going from country to country within the strict time limits. And that's it really. Get to the checkpoint before the timer runs out, selecting either left or right to choose your own personal path through Europe, and visit all the countries, getting leading to a different ending depending on the path that you've selected. Now, I still remember the first time I saw Outrun in the arcades. It was so far ahead of all the racing competition, being silky smooth and fast and absolutely gorgeous to look at, with amazing summer locations and a beautiful car of your dreams and a blonde bombshell sat beside you. It was all us kids wanted in our wildest dreams, particularly on a rainy, dreary holiday in England, where it gave us a little bit of summer. And since that moment that I first saw Outrun, I always make a beeline to it whenever I see it in arcades since. In fact, I remember taking far more than a chunk out of my holiday as a kid in Malta, spending most of my time not in the glorious sunshine as I should have been, but in a dingy bar, as they had a deluxe Outrun cabinet, yes, the one that moved, with the gorgeous stereo speakers blasting out the tunes. And so as a 14-year-old I spent my time playing that, making the most of the good exchange rate of the day. Yes, since that first time seeing in the arcade, I've always tried to recreate that feeling in the home as well, buying every possible version of Outrun that I could to try and recreate that feeling outside of the arcades. So when I got this first computer that I actually owned, Spectrum Plus 2, Outrun was the first game I bought. And despite the slowness, it was a pretty good conversion really. And then when I went on from my Amiga, one of the principal reasons I stopped getting the Batman pack and went for what turned out to be a real lemon, the Screen Gems Amiga pack, was because the deal they were offering had some Sega Arcade Classic bundle which had Outrun on it, and I was desperate to get Outrun for the Amiga, and boy was I disappointed with that version. Likewise, when everybody else and all my friends were going for the PlayStation, I went for the Sega Saturn. Why did I do that? Well, it's because I wanted an arcade perfect port of Outrun, and I knew there was one in the works, and I knew that with Sega were coming out with a steering wheel as well, so this would be a thing of my dreams. And in fairness, they did deliver. This is probably the best legitimate way to play Outrun in the home with the original car, because after that, apart from one example which I may come to later, the car unfortunately got changed when Sega lost the Ferrari license. Yes, since that time I've picked up the Dreamcast version, I've picked up the Game Boy Advance version, the 3DS version, and now even the Switch, which are all great versions to play out as I try to rekindle my original love of that first time I ever saw the game. Now thankfully the Arcade Club in Bury, and I believe Leeds as well, has the deluxe Outrun cabinet on free play, so I've been lucky enough to spend many happy hours playing the glorious moving sit-down cabinet again, the way it was intended. So for so much love of Outrun and its game, which I clearly possess, why is it number 2 on my list? Well, I'll be honest, it surprised me a little as well, as for the longest time I've confidently decreed that Outrun is my favourite game of all time. The thing is, as much as I do adore the game and for all it stands for, removing nostalgia, when you consider the hundreds and hundreds of hours I've put into this game, I've just never really improved. I know that's on me. I mean, it's just, no matter how hard I try, I just can't get better at this game. And I know it's me because I've seen many skilled gamers finish the game on top difficulty without even breaking a sweat. Hell, most of them don't even use the brake at any point, and I know that's one of the tricks that I'm supposed to learn. But for me, as much as I love it, and as much as I try to learn these tricks of other racers, I just can't do it. There's always a rogue vehicle in the way that just destroys, and the game is so punishingly hard that a single mistake is usually, you might as well walk away and end it at that point. You're just not going to finish it, particularly if you're going above normal setting. Also, you might be wondering, why have I chose the enhanced version and not the original? Well, Chris White just simply has improved it in every way. There may be little and subtle changes, but he's done everything from add additional music tracks, which is a nice touch, but also adding tweaking to the game's controls and fixing the incorrect time calculations of the original game. So working things out correctly. But mostly it's just everything is wonderfully smooth. He's improved sprite scaling and keeping everything locked to 60 frames per second. It's less juddery when you turn around on corners. He's added widescreen and it all corners just that little bit better and just improves this game to absolute perfection as far as I'm concerned. Now he's done oodle more little subtle tweaks that you can select in the menu, such as you can even put on off-road tyres so if you go off the road you don't slow down, and little subtle things like that. As I say, it is a PCB board version that you can add, and it's definitely well worth giving that a try along with the Outrun original. Right, okay, let's come to my favourite game then for the letter O. And I have of course gone for Outrun 2, released in 2003 by Sega. Well, actually not quite. I've actually gone for specifically the 2006 edition, which is called Outrun 2 Special Tours Super Deluxe, or SDX version. Now the reason I've gone for this version, well, you probably can tell by looking at it, because as well as it having all the special tours of the 2004 edition, it looks simply gorgeous with upscaling the graphics from the original 640 to 800, and it looks all the more beautiful for it. Now, although this is Yu Suzuki produced game, the team who actually worked on this, such as Makoto Osaki or Daichi Katagiri or Yukitoshi Katsuyama, they've all been veterans since the Virtua Racing and Daytona days, and they don't disappoint here by them making, for me, the best arcade racer of all time. This takes all that was wonderful about the original, but they've added drifting of games like Ridge Racer to hone it to pure arcade racing perfection, as you race around a whole range of fully licensed Ferrari cars across beautiful Sega Blue Sky locales, with you either choosing the original Outrun 2 tracks, which are nice but are perhaps a little somber, and also the wonderful SP add-on tracks, the Special Tours edition that gives you a massive array of road to tarmac your way through, and the Special Tours edition tracks are simply beautiful, being really imaginative and very bright and colourful compared to the more sombre, morose original Sega Outrun 2 game tracks. Musically as well, not only do you have the brilliant updated renditions of the Outrun tunes, but there's also some unique ones to the game as well, and it even calls in stuff from Turbo Outrun, which is a nice touch. Even better, you can even choose the original Outrun music to race to in all their chiptune glory, should you wish as well. Now game mode wise, it's great as well with options, because you have the original Outrun style, but you also have the heart attack mode, where you carry out small mini-game objectives to win the heart of your girl. Yes, I just simply never tire of this game since its release. I've always been willing to pump money into it whenever I see it, and it's testament to how good this game is that even 18 years on, you can guarantee that Outrun 2, a sit-down cabinet, will be somewhere in an arcade, any arcade you care to visit. Thankfully though, Arcade Club has lots of these Outrun 2 machines on free play, and it really is the stuff of my dreams. Now since its release, there's thankfully been a swathe of amazing home ports of the Outrun 2 games, handled by the ever-capable UK developer Sumo Digital, who simply did miracles bringing it to the Xbox and later onto the PS2 and PlayStation Portable. And I've diligently bought about every damn iteration of these games that's ever come out, and they all have their virtues. Now the exclusive Xbox port of the original Outrun 2 is actually amazing and often overlooked. Now of course it's missing the SP tracks because it came out before that had been released, but it does however have a fully working original fully licensed Outrun game hidden on the game disc. That's right, as well as Outrun 2, by putting in a cheat you can actually unlock the original Outrun 1986 game, and it's got the car exactly as it should be. Along with that, if that wasn't cool enough, there's loads of hidden tracks on the game that aren't just the Outrun tracks. There's Daytona and Scud Racer, many of the other Sega arcade classics that you can actually race on as well, all locked away. And for me, that's what makes this a vital purchase, as outside of the Sega Saturn, this is the only way to play the original Outrun game legitimately without being it altered on the car away from a Ferrari. Later on, Sega and Sumo Digital released a sequel called Coast to Coast in 2006, which found its way onto the original Xbox, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable and the PC. Now this adds in critically this special tour tracks, which are so much better and brighter, quite frankly, and it adds in some extra music as well and gives some other modes and more missions for you to follow. Sadly though, and probably because Sumo Digital got caught first time around, the original Outrun arcade machine that was hidden and the non-Outrun hidden tracks have all been pulled from this version, and it's a real shame, and it does give reason why you do need to own both versions really if you're an Outrun 2 fan. Now the best version in my opinion is the PC version, because it will upscale the visuals even beyond the arcade original and do netlink play as well, making this perfect game for LAN parties. Later on as well, you had the Outrun Online Arcade, which was digitally sold on the Xbox 360 and PS3. Now this has only the SP tracks, unfortunately dropping the Outrun 2 tracks, but it does have the advantage of an online leaderboard and online multiplayer, which made this great fun to play through. Sadly though, these versions can't be bought anymore since Sega lost the Ferrari license, meaning that everything had to be pulled from the digital stores. So therefore these days, unless you're lucky enough to go somewhere like Arcade Club or willing to afford putting in constant quids into arcade machines dotted around the country, then your best bet is to pick up an old version of these home ports, particularly on the PC if you've got a good enough PC to allow you to legitimately play this game. Now alternatively, if you do have a really good gaming rig, then the SDX version is perfectly emulated on Technoparrot. Now after a bit of painful setup, which is worthy of your time, this really is the ultimate way to enjoy this classic game in the home, particularly if you've got a steering wheel to give you that full-on action. Okay, so there you go, they were my personal top 5 games chosen for the letter O. But I want to give some honourable mentions, as these games are little known or forgotten today, and so I think well worthy of your time. Right, okay, the first one we have is quite well known actually, it's Outrunners, and this is the third arcade game in the Outrun series, or 6 if you include all the home Outruns such as Battle Outrun and 3D Outrun. Now released in 1992 by Sega, this doesn't have a Ferrari license, and instead tries to capture that original inspiration by Outrun, being of course the Cannonball Run films. So in keeping with that, you can choose between 8 wildly different cars, each with their own madcap and crazy drivers, as you race around the world going from exotic locales. And the game here has some really nice touches, such as swapping music in-game at any point. Now I've got a lot of time for this game personally, and it's a real shame it often gets overlooked, as not many people saw it in the arcades and only a few saw the single home port of the Mega Drive, which was quite frankly depressingly bad. So these days, unless you're lucky enough to stumble across it in the arcades or rich enough to pick up that one-up arcade machine that includes Outrun, Turbo Outrun, Power Drift and Outrunners, then you'll need to emulate, unfortunately. But boy, I tell you, as soon as I've got the space, I'm buying one of those one-up arcade machines. Thankfully, for the meantime, MAME does a great job running it, and especially if you have a steering wheel, it's a great way to recreate it in the home. Now another game seldom talked about is Mitchell's game called Osman, also known as Cannon Dancer in Japan. This is actually made by the original designer and the team behind Strider. So it really is Strider sequel in all but name. Released in 1996, this has you play Kirin, who must stop an evil sorcerer take over the world. This, as mentioned, is really Strider in all but name, and it's so darn good, being really pretty and with some great set pieces and really cool end level bosses for you to somersault your way around. Now this is one that sadly has never ever seen a home port, so unless you're lucky enough to go to, yes you guessed it, Arcade Club in Bury, which amazingly has this game, then MAME is really your only way to enjoy it. Still, it's definitely a game worthy of your time, especially if you're a big fan of the Strider games. Talking of enjoyable hidden gems, then the off-road Thunder, released in 1999 by Midway, is a great amount of fun. As you probably can tell, I have a real soft spot for toy box physics arcade races, so this already ticks a lot of boxes for me. Now technically this is actually part of the same series as the Thunder series, such as Hydro Thunder, but it's also a direct sequel to Off-Road Challenge, which was an arcade game released in 1997 and on the N64. So that actually means that technically, if you squint a bit, this is the sequel to Iron Man Super Off-Road. Now like those games, it has you ride around a series of dirt tracks doing jumps and collecting nitros for boosts. It has 3 different modes here. There's a standard rally, which is just simply crossing the line first. Demolition, game points for destroying and smashing your opponents. Or snag the flag, which has you hitting the opponent truck with the flag to then try and not be hit for the longest period possible whilst you're holding on to the flag, getting points for the time you've held on to it. Now this is certainly a game that's a huge amount of fun, and whilst I admit it's not going to set the world on fire, it did thankfully make its way onto the brilliant arcade compilation Midway Arcade Treasures Volume 3, which came out in the original Xbox, PS2 and GameCube era. And it's this version that you're actually seeing me play here, with it doing even better job than what MAME can do for this game. Now I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. If you do love your arcade racers, then you need to track down Midway Arcade Treasures Volume 3. It really does have a great lineup of some cool, obscure arcade racing games that play far better on this than it does on MAME. MAME does seem to struggle with a lot of races getting the controls right. Of course, the other way of doing it is get a GameCube Dolphin emulator and of course play it Arcade Treasure Volume 3 through that. It's another good way of doing it. Okay, let's go on to the next game, which is Amiga Fighter, released by UPL in 1989. Now this was produced by Iwatani, yes, he who designed Pac-Man, and his team here were the people behind Atomic Robo Kid. Now this essentially has you fly against big battleships, taking down all the enemy fighters and seeing how much you've destroyed of the battleship by the time you reach the end. This does have great power-ups and fast gameplay, and it's a huge amount of fun to play. And thankfully, alongside MAME of course, this has a great port that's recently come to the Switch as part of the Arcade Archive series. Now this does a great recreation, but it also includes 3 versions. You have the Arcade Original, you have the Special Edition version, and also the Dip Switch special version that was hidden on the arcade board, all accessible from the beginning. So along with all the online leaderboards, it's a great way to play this. Now another hidden gem that many will have missed is this Chinese arcade game called Oriental Legend Special Edition, or sometimes it's known as Super, which was a remixed and greatly improved version of the original 1997 game, and this was released in the following year of 1998. Now based on many Chinese folklore characters and enemies, this is a wonderful scrolling beat 'em up that's based on a Chinese novel called The Long Journey. But what we have here is is a really fun title that lets you play the Monkey King or a Pigman as you go against others and fight your way through many magical creatures and visiting great exotic locales. Now I've chosen the Super or Special Edition over the original because it really does a lot to improve it. It changes around many of the opening levels, removing many of the cheap deaths on those opening levels, and it just simply makes it far more enjoyable to spend your time with. This really is a hidden gem and well worthy of your time, particularly if you love scrolling beat-em-ups. Now another interesting title here is Outrigger, released in 1999. Now this was actually a Yu Suzuki produced game. It was Sega's interesting attempt to try and take their battle arena death matches and arena shooters popular in the day like Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament. But of course, this being a Japanese developer, they do things differently. They move it to third person and they have a variety of challenges alongside the death matches for you to enjoy. Now sadly, whilst the original used a trackball, unless you're lucky enough to have the Dreamcast mouse, or I guess you could emulate it, then this is a really tough game to play on a standard Dreamcast controller, as you're hampered by the single analog stick, having to use the D-pad to do the actual movements. Still, if you do get the right controller setup, then this is genuinely a really nice fun alternative to games like Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament, and well worthy of your time. It's certainly one that I wish the rumours had come to fruition, because they were talking about doing a HD remaster of this, and I think it would have been much better received on modern consoles with a twin stick controller. Either way, it's definitely worthy of your time to give it a quick go. Now talking of fun games well worthy of your time, then Over Top is a great little overhead little racers. Now it came out on the Neo Geo in 1996, and it's certainly a one that's a lot of fun to play through with a nice range of cars and places to race on, and I do have a soft spot for this kind of racing game, if I'm honest. Now finally we come to the brilliant cute little horizontal shoot-'em-up shooter called Ordin. Released in 1988 by Namco, this has great gameplay and amazing music by Shinji Hosoe, who's of course worked on everything from Ridge Racer to very recently Tetris 99 on the Switch. And this game has you fly around as the professor, shooting turtles and a wide variety of creatures and some cool bosses. The game is pretty ace really. It has even a wonderful cameo of Pac-Man, which I think is really cool as well. Now the game did get a good TurboGrafx and PC Engine port back in the day, and it did find itself on the Namco Museum Volume 4 on the PlayStation, but since then it's never appeared on any of the subsequent Namco emulated compilations, which is really sad. So these days the only real way to play it is on MAME, but as you can see, MAME does a great job. Right, okay, that's it for this letter. Let me know in the comments of what personal top 5 games you would have chosen for the letter O, so I genuinely would love to hear. So look out for my next video on the letter P. And I, for one, am deeply excited about covering this brilliant letter, as there's so many amazing games contained within the letter P, so I personally cannot wait. So, until next time, keep it retro.